Hey everyone, thank you very much for joining us for another Modern Sales Power Hour. I am super pumped to have our amazing guest here today, Steve Silver, a researcher par excellence at Forrester. We're going to get into a little bit of introductions for him a little bit more here in a hot second, but a wealth of knowledge with respect to modern sales and revenue operations and the enablement and leverage of the modern sales organization. Steve, while we're waiting for some folks to kind of like trickle in here, have you had any cool trips recently? I know you're a big golfer. Did you get out of the country? Any kind of like thing of note there?
Yeah, we did. We took what in some people's minds I think would be a risk and went to Costa Rica in January.
Oh, wow.
And the reason that could have been a risk is at the time, to get back into the US, you had to take a COVID test. And
Oh, goodness.
you just never know. I mean, even though the incidence of COVID is very low there and we're vaccinated, you could have gotten exposed, which means you now have to spend anywhere from 5 to 10 days in
Maybe
country, isolated in a hotel room. So
I was just saying, like, maybe that's not necessarily, oh man, our vacation in Costa Rica just had to get extended by a week. But I guess as you point out, like, being isolated in a hotel room, not the most compelling thing in the
yeah,
world.
they don't put you up in a room with an ocean view.
Yeah. Oh, really?
No, but it was a fantastic trip. It's one of my favorite countries. I think we've been there 3 or 4 times now, and it's just a lovely place to visit. Uh, Turned out the risk was worthwhile, and we're starting to travel for business again. So that's a few
Yeah.
trips coming up there, which is very
Yeah.
exciting.
I just totally I just had my first business trip in like a hot second last week. I visited a bunch of Atrium customers in Atlanta. We have like
Yeah,
an oddly large number of customers in Atlanta, which is absolutely fantastic because like wonderful sales culture, amazing sales organizations there. Obviously there's Sales Loft and Flock Safety and SAS Optics and so on and so forth, a number of others. And kind of overdid it, like kind of got out over my skis, like took the red eye on Tuesday night because like, I thought I was a lot like younger and like spry, and then like rolled straight into like a pretty aggressive customer dinner on Tuesday night at like a very old school steakhouse, and definitely was like feeling it for the rest of the week. So I think if there's folks out there who are like, getting ready to like ramp up on a business trip or something, just be a little bit mindful of that.
yeah.
Don't pull a Pete on yourself there. Wonderful. Well, Steve, we can kind of get jamming here. So for everybody, welcome to Modern Sales Power Hour. I'm Pete Kazanjy. Everyone probably knows me already. Just kind of like while we're getting started here for folks to get familiar, this event is really focused on audience participation as much as possible. So please use the chat panel to leverage for Q&A, and so on and so forth. Because the whole idea here is for, you have two modern sales nerds at your disposal. We'd love to answer your questions. Obviously, a bunch got submitted ahead of time, but like that's literally the goal of this. So for folks who aren't familiar, Power Hour is hosted by Modern Sales Pros. MSP is the world's largest revenue leadership community for those in sales management, sales and revenue operations, sales development, and related disciplines. And so the community's mission is to create an environment for our 30,000 and growing members to answer questions they struggle to solve on their own, help them see around corners, answer questions that they might not know about. And so the way that we do that is through great live sessions, like you're about to experience today. We have a robust online forum as well that's really focused on Q&A, and in the near future, in-person events. So for those who weren't previously members of Modern Sales Pros, you'll be admitted. You'll have access to the forum. It'll be really fun. Before we get started, a couple reminders here. Power Hour is it's a unique format. It's really focused on Q&A as much as possible. We want to be very tactical. If you have a burning question that that you would like to have answered in some sort of capacity, that's the reason why we bring wonderful thinkers onto the show to kind of like to tackle those questions. And so with that, like I would love to kind of head into some introductions here. I'll just go really quickly. So I'm Pete Kazanjy. I'm the founder of Modern Sales Pros, but I'm also the founder and CRO at Atrium. Just for folks that may not be aware, Atrium makes data-driven sales management software that that helps managers use metrics to improve team and rep performance. One of the things that's really cool about Atrium is super easy to set up. You just log in with your Salesforce credentials, and within 5 minutes, Atrium will show you how your reps are performing across hundreds of metrics, et cetera, et cetera. So like, obviously all we think about is like sales nerdery and sales science all day long. Steve, you are also a bit of a sales scientist. You know, you are a VP of research at Forrester. I would love for you to kind of introduce yourself, let people know kind of like how you spend your time at Forrester, and maybe a couple of the roles before that, just so folks kind of like know like where you're coming from.
Yeah. Thanks, Pete. And really excited about today's conversation. And I want to come back to your point about meeting with clients in person, because I think that's something we want to talk about and where that sits today.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. So I probably got drawn into sales operations because going way back in distant memory, came out of school with an engineering degray. So a little bit of that, that sort of technical orientation, that process orientation. Early in the communications industry, worked with MCI for a number of years. Actually ended up carrying a bag, being a sales rep for MCI, and then moving into sales management, and then finally into sales operations 20 some odd years ago, which is a little frightening to think about. Because
it's changed quite a bit, and we'll talk about that. But like, from the sales, from like the sales prevention department to like the sales leverage department. But
and your point about metrics, bluntly, we weren't metrics driven back then. I mean, it was you hired what you hoped were good people, and you set them free. And it was when you talk about sales as the combination of art and science back then, it was definitely more on the art side, and it was wishful thinking. But over the last 20 years, it's just, and that's kind of what led me to Forrester now. It's just watching the evolution of sales technology and the insights we can now get into buyer behavior, customer behavior, how they purchase and consume the products that we're offering. The pendulum has really swung so much more over towards the science side of selling. And that's what, for me, makes it so exciting to be at Forrester and kind of, helping our clients apply that to their organizations.
Totally. And I think, why not just like key off of what you said earlier? I think for a lot of organizations, the last like year and a half, 2 years has been like folks are been pushed very substantially into a more digital environment, which of course like means a bunch of different things and kind of has like technology ramifications and management ramifications. But then there's like the other side of it as well, like in-person meetings and what have you. And so I would love to kind of hear from you, like how, like if your research or kind of anything like that has kind of indicated what was because a lot of people are like, oh man, this new virtual world, like everything's possible. And I think that folks kind of didn't end up missing the things that they actually are missing, like they're like silently missing, and like so you have this like opportunity cost that people are not aware of. At least that's my inclination. I wonder if that like resonates at all with like your research or kind of like what you've observed in the market.
It definitely does. I mean, like you said, roughly 2 years ago last month, we were all immediately forced into just a massive change in the way we reach our customers, the way we engage with our customers, the way the lack of inability to do in-person interactions. And yet, our research into buyer behavior and preferences shows that to a very large extent, they still value those interactions with individuals, with sales reps. What they don't want is information control. They don't want the sales rep to be in charge of what information they get to see, how they get to evaluate a company, what gets proposed to them. They want sales reps to help guide them to the right solution for their organization. That might be something we want to explore a little bit, is kind of that changing role of the sales rep from pushing somebody to an outcome, to guiding them to an outcome that's right for them, even if sometimes that decision is, hey, this product isn't the right solution for you, and so that's where you get that trusted advisor type relationship. And I think that's what's still valued by buyers, right? Not the number of interactions. So
Yeah, and I think manufacture. So this is one of the things I talk with my reps about, is like essentially like manufacturing relationships, which obviously is like kind of it's an intentionally kind of like awkward turn of phrase, right? Because like, oh, relationships you can't manufacture. It's like, well, you actually kind of can, and that's what good salespeople are good at, is like, we're going to become friends within the first 5 minutes of this call because I'm going to do a very good job of like, rapid rapport building, and because I did a good job of like pre-call planning and what have you. And like obviously that can be executed to a certain extent over Zoom. Like if you do good pre-call planning, this is something that like I train our reps on like crazy. We actually use Scratchpad as our note-taking solution and like pipeline management solution and what have you, but also like all of our templating for for how our sales calls go down. And so like that pre-call planning part is like right there, along with like, specifically like what is the thing you're going to pick out of their background that you're going to like use as a mechanism by which to like kickstart the relationship. All that said, it's still kind of like you're talking to someone through a screen, and like the in-person thing. And of course, as I was kind of making fun of myself earlier, the in-person part over steaks and drinks and what have you, kind of it there's something else there. And I wonder if like, is that measurable? Because like it certainly feels that way. And so I wonder if like you guys' research kind of indicates that like it's almost like Southwest Airlines and like kind of like low cost airfare is like a pretty compelling sales technology that like maybe we're not appreciating it as much as we should.
So sales tech is probably one of the most exciting thing that's happening today in the world of sales. And it's a radical change that we've seen mostly in the last 5 years, because we now have that ability to capture both those online interactions. Who went to our website? What did they look at? How long were they there? Those types of things. But we can capture so much more information about those person-to-person interactions, conversation intelligence, revenue operations tools. They capture not just the fact that an email was sent, but what was the context of the email? What was the sentiment? Who read it? How long did they spend on it? Who did they forward it to? The kind of stuff we've been trying to beat sales reps over the heads for the last 20 years to enter into a CRM.
Exactly.
And they never will, and they shouldn't, frankly. I think it's a huge waste of time.
It should be automatically captured. Yeah.
Absolutely. But it's only the last couple of years where we're really starting to see that come to the forefront.
Yeah.
Kind of back to your point, Pete. We can kind of quantify, was that a good interaction or was it a bad interaction?
Yeah.
Right. And judge, how can we make this a better interaction? So I don't think it's that, you see a lot of these statistics that, the buyer doesn't want to talk to the sales rep, or the buyers pick a number, 67% or 93% or whatever, through the buying process before they want to talk to a sales rep. And my answer to that is, well, it depends. If I'm buying a refill for a product that I've had on my shelf for 10 years, I can do that online. And
I don't want
to talk to a sales rep, right?
Yeah.
If I'm making a $500,000 software investment that is gonna, I'm betting the company on it. Well, you better believe I want to talk to sales reps. I want to talk to sales engineers. I want to talk to product managers. I want to talk to references.
I want to de-risk. I want to de-risk this decision. And I'd like, this is one of the things that like the way that I describe to my reps how they should think about themselves is like consultants that happen to have like a predilection towards a particular solution, right? They have a predilection to it. Like they're not dogmatic about it, because like, trying to shove a round peg in a square hole is not going to work out. One of the things I like to say to folks is like, people talk about like, oh man, that guy or that gal is an amazing sales rep. They could sell, ice to an Eskimo. Well, like only an asshole like sells ice to an Eskimo. Like, come on, like they're going to churn. They're going to tell all their buddies this was stupid. Like, what are you doing? This is like a multi-round game sort of, sort of situation. And so, so I think that's something that is like, extremely important. I think one thing that I find fascinating though, of course, like we've digitized so much of the selling experience. Like we're big fans of Chorus and Gong over here. My organization actually uses both for some weird reason, because we have integrations with them in Atrium. And so of course we need to have like the data flow. Anyway, I digress, but we're fans of both of them. And I think one of the things that's actually kind of cool about inside sales is because so much of the sales behavior is digitized, and especially even like outside reps that are like now in their home office or what have you. There's an interesting thing though. It's like when you go on site or when you go to, you do client entertainment or you like, visit the office or even a conference or what have you, it's almost like the taking it offline starts kind of like removing visibility, which, and so it's almost like what you would want is you would want like both, right? Like I want to have my cake and eat it too. Like I want the high, like the high frequency, high affinity interaction over drinks, over a meal, in person, like sitting side by side at a conference or whatever. But I don't want to lose the digital contrails that come out of that.
Yeah.
Have you seen, I remember like back, like ClearSlide actually had like an iPhone app and then like an iPad app, like a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. Have you seen anything around like helping to digitize the offline selling experience in a way that like we don't lose visibility on that?
I haven't seen anything specifically like that. And
Really?
I think
I want it.
Yeah, I don't think there's any technical barriers to doing that, right?
Yeah.
So, I mean, there's no reason you couldn't have pick a company, a Gong app or a Chorus app or any of the other CI vendors on your phone, click record. And, I mean, I can already record voice memos and have those translated to text. And so the capability to do that is there. I think what it might be more an emotional barrier. It's an interesting phenomenon. People don't seem to have a problem with a recorded phone call or a recorded video call. But when you're sitting down face to face with someone and you pick up your phone and you sit it between and go, hey, do you mind if I record this session? Yeah. I think people might go, no, I don't want this recorded, right? And maybe that's a barrier to that kind of letting the guard down a little bit.
I feel that, and then, but I think that the same was probably true with, like this is one of the things that I talk a lot about as relates to like new categories of technology that are emergent. Oftentimes, what ends up happening is like you have to go against existing kind of like predispositions and whatever. Like so like when Chorus and Gong first came out, of course, it was like the same sort of thing. It was like, what is this thing? What's going on here? And so like you would ask. This is how I oftentimes explain kind of like new category creation to a lot of folks. It's just like, 5 or 6 years ago, you say like, oh, what's your call recording solution? And people would say like, what do you mean? Like record my calls. We're like, what? Whereas now you would say like, oh, what's your call recording, solution? Or alternatively, like, what's your conversation intelligence solution, right? And then someone will immediately be like, oh yeah, we use Chorus. Oh yeah, we use Gong. Oh yeah, we use like SalesLoft conversations or Outreach Kaya or what have you. But like now, like the buyer is kind of like attenuated to it. And then what's funny is you actually see we see this a lot with our customers because we actually sell on customer data. So like because Atrium takes like 5 minutes to set up, what ends up happening is like our AEs, to your point about like guiding like a decision, they like really focus on like their first disco call, like about 70% of the time, they're like turning on an Atrium account for somebody. Like someone just like shares their screen, turns on an Atrium account with 5 minutes and they reconvene in like 72 hours. And so what happens is that in that second meeting, it's not like a demo, right? Where it's like, hey, check this out. It's like, hey, we're going to guide you through your Atrium account, talking about the topics that matter for you. Like, oh, ramping, like, oh, I got like 5 AEs that are ramping right now. And I'm like, oh, I don't know what the leading indicators are. But what's funny is then oftentimes customers will be like, hey, can you send me that Chorus link?
Right.
Isn't that crazy? And so like, it's like the customer has now like, whereas 5 years ago, they're like, whoa, what is this big brother thing or whatever? And now they're like, oh yeah, can you send that to me? So like, I can use that as like the tip of my spear when I go and talk to the CFO. And so I wonder if like, oftentimes, and this is like the sales thing, right? Oftentimes it's like a very small turn of phrase that can help somebody kind of get comfy with that. Like, so like what you're talking about, like hey, can I record this right here? Like, versus like, hey, I'm just going to put my note taker here, so I don't forget any of the brain, like the wonderful brain nuggets that you're going to drop right now. Oh, ha, 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 you're so funny, Pete. And then, like you're on your merry way. So,
right. Yeah.
Maybe.
Or you position it as, I'd like to capture our conversation so that we do a better job of understanding your needs and make sure we're delivering value to you. And you're doing the same thing, you're right, but it completely changes the tone of the conversation and it takes the technology out of the way and you get back to the sales rep connecting.
Right. It's about customer utility and customer centricity. Oh man, Steve. I mean, I think you probably have had a situation where you've had a discovery conversation with the rep before, and then like the next time you talk to them, it's all like gone out there, like exited their brain, right?
Right.
Oh yeah, tell me about it. Yeah. Well, so the way that I address it is I have my little note taker here. Oh, okay, cool. Sounds great. I'm so glad you're not going to forget anything that I said.
Right.
That's so funny. Yeah, we're actually so we have this big summit coming up for modern sales pros. It's called Supercharged, and one of the sessions I'm particularly excited about is one on new category selling, which is just like it's like so hard. It's like so calorically intensive because like it's like part marketing, part selling. Like it's like hand-to-hand marketing or like hand-to-hand selling. And I think it's the head of sales from Scratchpad, head of sales from Reprise, and there's a couple of others that are in there as well. That are kind of like these emergent categories. But it, like so much of that is kind of like handling those sort of things where someone's like, I've never done this before. This is like, really weird.
Yeah.
And I imagine that was probably the case because since you've been around the block, 20 years ago when you first started doing like sales operations, and you're saying there was like no data available, and so now there's just like tons of data. And so like, how did that like change happen over time? Like, what were the biggest kind of like thematic changes you saw over the last like 20 years as you were watching that transition happen?
Yeah, it's a great question. I'd say, focusing only on sales.
Yeah.
I think the biggest change has been sales reps kind of making that mental shift that that I'm going to say this, they don't own the customer, right? It wasn't so many years ago.
My Rolodex.
Yeah, they had their Rolodex. It was literally, we're old enough. It was a physical device, or I had a card catalog. And when I left,
my clients, you want me to put my clients in your CRM?
Right. And, we still find clients. We do this pipeline analysis with some of our clients. Anywhere from 70 to 80% of their deals that close don't enter the CRM until they're in stage 3 or 4. And it's not because that's where the first time the rep starts working on them. It's because the reps aren't putting things in there, right? And that we can help with technology. But I also think that first of all, that mentality has shifted as more and more people enter sales. I'm a big proponent of this. I think sales is becoming and has to continue to become more professional, right? It's a skill. It's something we can train for. It's something we can learn. It's something we can improve. Yeah. And it needs to be a respected profession.
Yeah.
That's why I have such a visceral reaction when somebody says, oh, sales reps are coin operated. I hate that term because, to me, that's like, no, if I'm coin operated, I put in $1 and I get a Coke every time. Same thing every time. That's not what you want in a sales rep. So
no, because you can automate that, right? And like I think this is the big delta is like the thing, like low complexity sales will be automated in some sort of capacity, either through some sort of e-commerce interface. But as soon as there's like a meaningful decision tree that's happening that like needs a human to interact to help traverse that decision tree and navigate it, like that's where that human effort comes in. I think that's a really good point about the like entering the CRM data. Like I think what ends up have like there has to be a give and take where there's like a what's in it for me situation with like the reps, but also the managers. Like you can't just come off the top rope and be like, you're doing it this way. And so if you think about it, a lot of the times there's like emerging technologies that kind of like cut that gridlock. So a good example of this was like with the rise of prospect databases like Zoom Info or Lead IQ or fill in the blank or whatever. Like now all of a sudden sales ops is like executing a full CRM strategy where they're just like shoving that in there, right? And then like tranching out the territories or whatever. And so now all of a sudden the reps are like, oh, okay. This came full.
Maybe this is good for me. Yeah.
Oh, I see. Right. And then like, good pipeline operating like rhythms or what have you. Like, hey, the reason why it's important for you to have these ops in your pipe is because like, honestly, like you're just a human and like you can probably only keep 10 things in your brain at once, but if you could keep like, but we want you to work like 30 ops or 40 ops. So like, let's keep track of those bad boys,
Right.
even if they're at like stage 2 or whatever. And like, hey, check out the win rate on, Susie over here, who does a way better job of like using her CRM as like a to-do list. Great. Right. And I feel that a lot of that stuff kind of came from sales operations and like people who have very process oriented mindsets, right? Like one of the metaphors that I like to use with respect to modern sales organizations is their revenue factories, right? It just happens to be that the machines and the assembly lines are humans, and so humans are squishy, and they don't follow directions necessarily. They do within like they in the swim lanes, they like bounce between the swim lanes, right? They're not like on a rail exactly, but like you need that because they're forming the relationships, they're being persuasive, they're answering those questions, etc. But you should model it like like a factory. And I think that that's really has been the big thing with sales ops over the last like 10-ish years, where it went from like kind of like the tail on the dog of like, oh, just do comp. Right. Yeah, hey man, just do comp. Just shut up and do comp.
Yeah.
Right. Or like, hey, recut these territories. So now it's like the dog, where it's like, hey, what we're doing is like, where's the hitches in our giddy up? Where are the constraints in our factory here? And like, what's the most important constraint? And then like, how can we unwind that? I think one of the things, what have you seen in like the last 5 years around like where those biggest areas of like leverage are that sales operations can bring to bear in these modern sales orgs?
Yeah, this is a really interesting conversation. It is something we talk with our clients a lot about, is this transition of sales operations from a very tactical, very administrative type function into something that is highly strategic and leading the transformation or evolution of the organization, right? Through the insights that they build, the technology they deploy, the processes they put in place. Just to build on what you said, Pete, it hasn't exclusively been the evolution of sales ops. It's also been the dawning of marketing operations and now customer operations as functions. And I think that's why we're starting to see more and more revenue operations emerge.
Yeah.
An operations focused person or team that can look across that entire revenue engine or revenue factory.
Yep.
And treat it as a whole, not just, oh, marketing does this, and then they hand the baton to sales, and sales does that, and then they hand it to customer success, and they do this. It's better drawn as a circle than as a linear diagram.
Yeah, totally. I know that Jocko at like Winning by Designs talks about this a lot. It's kind of like the bow tie versus like the funnel, right? And actually, but I have a lucid chart, shocking, of our sales process, right? And but there's always the loop back.
Yeah.
Right. There's the loop back, right?
Absolutely, especially for most of us now, we're in some form of recurring revenue model, whether we're software as a service or drill bits as a service or cars as a service. I mean, every company's driving towards some form of recurring revenue model. And so that acquisition of the customers is really only the first step. Then you got to implement, service, retain, grow, expand with
success
that customer. And I like the bow tie analogy because you're really launching a new stream of work when you close that first deal with that customer.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. And I think one of the things that I've seen as well is the behaviors that you can really tell that sales operations people are like deploying solutions internally when you start seeing this permeability between someone who's a sales operations person and then they go and they're a solutions consultant or like a solutions consulting leader at like some technology organization. Like probably my favorite example of this is there's this gentleman named Don Oddfos, who's the VP of sales operations at Lean Data. And he's been a sales ops guy for forever. He was at MuleSoft. He always tells a story about how like he had a manager who's either at MuleSoft or like maybe it was App Annie, who was like, Don, you're not an amazing sales rep, but man, you'd be awesome at sales ops because you are so organized. And so like he'd done sales ops for a while, and then he like went to lead solutions consulting at SalesLoft because he had been an early SalesLoft customer, and like he did that for a couple of years, and then kind of bounced back to now he leads leads revenue operations at Lean Data. And I think what that really indicates is that you've got these folks who are like really good practitioners who are like driving business change in their own organization, because then what ends up happening is they flip over to a vendor and they like scalably drive business change in like all those customer base. I mean, I guess you're an example of this as well.
Mhm.
You know, going and being a researcher, of course, it's probably a little bit more of a rarefied, there's not tons and tons of that, but I think that really kind of indicates how, you know, how that's, how the sales operations is kind of like more of the dog versus the tail now, and more and more. I think you're also seeing too, a lot of sales leaders that have more of a, there are some sales leaders who have historically had engineering kind of STEM backgrounds, but it's like it's definitely the exception. Right. Yeah. Some, like, I think John McMahon from PTC, and like, you know, he's on the board at like Snowflake right now. I think he did like, you know, double E undergrad or whatever. There's a handful, right? And then like, obviously you're an example of this, but like, whereas now it's like becoming more and more common. Is that something that you're observing?
Definitely. So, you know, and we've written a lot about this. I think.
Oh, really?
The legacy approach to sales leadership of, hey, I'm just going to go hire a bunch of sales reps, knowing that 20 to 40% of them are going to fail, and we'll churn those out and we'll go hire some more. You know, it's kind of the 20, 60, 20. 20% are going to generate 80% of my revenue. 60% are going to be in the middle and do okay. And 20% are going to churn out every year.
Yeah.
I'm like, I can't think of come back to a factory. If you were doing that with your factory workers, you'd be producing crappy automobiles that nobody wants to drive. It's crazy.
Yeah, you have 10 assembly lines and like, you know, 6 of them are a loss. It's like, what?
Right. And so in the same way that sales is becoming a profession and sales operations is becoming a profession, sales leadership is becoming a profession. And they're starting to bring much more science to sales leadership, right?
Oh, totally. And like, no one gets taught it, right? Because if you think about it, like, where do managers come from? They come from being like, they come from AEs. They're battlefield promoted when they're, you know, 26 or 28 or whatever. It's like, hey, cool, like, go, now you're responsible for your team's quota, not just your own quota. Okay, well, like, how do I do that? I guess I'm just, you know, I got this hammer, everything looks like a nail right now, so I'm just going to help them close deals. Steve, what's up with the Lockheed deal? How's the Pepsi deal going on, right? And like,
I go, like, it's great, Pete. We're going to get this deal, man. I'm so excited.
They're gonna buy. They're totally gonna buy. And I think that there's definitely has been a historical absence of this, and this is when so one of our investors at Atrium is a gentleman named Brett Queener. He's a partner at Bonfire Ventures. He used to run sales operations at Salesforce a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. And one of the things that one of the reasons why he was excited to invest in Atrium, because his whole thing always was like, he had like 200 or 300 sales ops people at Salesforce. He's like, there is a need for, like, managers are insufficiently enabled and certainly not appropriately tooled to use data to manage their teams. And it totally makes sense, but also there's just like no kind of craft of that. Even if like you go and like look at the literature, thank goodness there's like more and more books coming out nowadays. So like Michelle Vazana wrote Crushing Quota. It's a good one recently on like, that's like focus on actual kind of like coaching. Obviously Jason Jordan's Cracking the Sales Management Code was all about metrics based, but you kind of need those together, which is like, hey, like metrics for metrics sake is like, because like what we want to do is we want to drive behavioral change, and so what that usually means is like, if metrics are over here in the sales ops land, but like the managers are not like actually applying it, then right. Corey Bray's like 5 Secrets of a Sales Coach is really fantastic. I really like that one. Do you have any kind of like recommended resources? I imagine there's probably like Forrester probably has a ton of
other than
like
Forrester.
Well, yeah. I mean, like, are there any particular like research studies or papers that you guys that you would recommend from Forrester that talks about sales management, sales leadership, sales coaching, things like that?
We do. We have a lot. And I don't want to make this, a Forrester promotion, but I would.
It's all right. Like, the content's good. The content's good.
Well, it's good. We call that what you're describing, insights-driven selling. And,
Sure.
and we emphasize the word insights because for an insight to be, useful, it has to be actionable. It has to be delivered to the person
Yeah.
who needs it at the point they need it in a way they can consume it. So
Yeah.
if
And
I'm
then
a
act on
sales
it.
rep and I'm working on a deal and I get a notice from marketing that says, oh, this contact at your company downloaded a white paper. I'm like, okay, that's interesting. Might or
Now
might
what?
not be relevant.
Now what?
But if I see that, hey, 5 people from this business unit have downloaded these 6 white papers, all of which are related to what we think is an opportunity, now I kind of go, oh, now I see client activity that's relevant to this opportunity and I can take action on that, right? So, and we can deliver those kinds of insights to everyone from the sales rep, what's the next best action here, to the sales manager, to the sales leader. Kind of comes back to the early conversation of that science-driven sales leader, right? Are we calling on the right customers? Do we have the right territories? Do we have the right quotas? Do we, are we putting the right plans in place? Am I getting valid opportunities from marketing? And that is just a huge change in how we manage sales. And it's coming back to where we started, Pete, taking sales. I think as long as there is a people-to-people business, there will still be art involved, right?
Definitely.
But it's using the science to drive the art, to make the art smarter, if you will.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I think about it kind of like fighter pilots, right? Like you've got this like very like extraordinarily highly trained person, tons of effort have gone into them, tons of capital has gone into it, and like, but there's still a very important component to it that's this human. Sean had a really great question here, and I think this is something that that like this is a transition that's happening now with operations. Is how do you help sales management use metrics and data more effectively? Because it's one thing to have like tooling for it, because like BI has been around for a while, right? Like Looker's been around, Tableau's been around, but like the problem is like the reasoning, right? And the interpretation is kind of the challenge for folks who aren't necessarily analytical by background. It's not to say that like, folks can't be taught that, they never are. And so historically, what like, again, Brett from Bonfire kind of like used to joke about this. He's like, oh yeah, we were terrible in sales ops. Like end of the quarter would happen. Like we'd, do all the analysis or whatever and be like, ha ha ha, we're like the data kings over here. Like we know all the answers, neener, right? But obviously like that's not the highest, performance way of going about that. But how do you like meet the managers where they are or enable them, especially given the fact that like most enablement resources go to the reps versus managers? Like, have you, do you have any kind of thoughts on like how to democratize that, how to make it easier for folks?
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack there. I will agree with you, definitely. Everybody talks about training sales managers. Almost no one invests in it. And not universally, but we all say, oh yes, the sales manager is the most important person. It's the reason we sales reps stay. It's the reason they're productive, blah, blah, blah. But we can't afford to take them out of the field to give them any training.
How much management do you, or like how much training do you do with them? Crickets.
Right, exactly. So definitely a problem.
Yeah.
And then just to unpack this metrics, how do you make them smarter? There's 2 components to that. The first is the data itself, just the raw data. Are you getting data that's relevant to them?
Yeah, capture.
Like all those interactions, the digital, the human, the non-human. Do you understand what drives buyer behavior? Do you understand why buyers would or would not buy? Do you understand who's involved in the purchase decision? So collecting all that data is a big part of it. And then putting it in front of the sales manager in a way that's useful to them and readily digestible. So, we talk about the difference between reporting and dashboards and these actionable insights that I described earlier, right? If I hand you a report, you kind of have to go through and figure out, well, what's important here? What does it mean? How do I use this? Forget it. I don't have time for that, right?
Exactly. We call that we call that dashboard diving, or like reading the tea leaves. Right. Kind of like little Sherlock Holmes action, like because as if we don't have like enough enough things to deal with that like you know what I should really do right now? I should go like look through like 20 tiles in a dashboard.
Right. Exactly. And figure out what's of that it's important. And oh, by the way, if you see one you think is important, you're going to have to click on it to open the report and then filter the report and do all that.
Good luck.
Yeah,
right.
Yeah. So I think sales.
Hey, what's up? What's up with the Lockheed deal? What's up with the Pepsi deal? Oh, they're going to close.
Right.
Yeah, so you just fall back
now
to
you
that.
can go in and quickly see in this dashboard, well, how many interactions have we had on the Lockheed deal? When was the last time the sales rep talked to them? Who did they talk to? What was the context of that conversation? Now the manager can hopefully call up the rep and go, hey, I see you haven't talked to XYZ at Lockheed in a while. How can I help, advance this deal? So they come in with that knowledge. I think it's a mindset change in how sales operations thinks about how they get knowledge and information to first line sales managers.
Yeah.
And we kind of, if you think about a dashboard again, most of them are backwards looking. They're like, tell me what already happened. How many calls did you make? How many, that kind of stuff. So you have to think about it in terms of, yes, I want to know what's happened, but I also want to know why it happened. Why did we win that deal? Why did we lose that deal? Did we get engaged too late? Were we just being used as a sounding board?
Stalking horse. Yeah.
And then the third component of that is, what should we do about it? And that's where things really get interesting. And we call that, interpretive knowledge, right? So now you're telling the sales manager, hey, that deal with Lockheed looks like it's stalled. We realize that the sales rep hasn't spoken to 3 of the 5 buyers we've identified. Here's what we think you should do, right? And all of a sudden it becomes very actionable.
Yeah, and I think and I think the application of data, the smart application of data, of course, applies at various levels, right? So what you're talking about right there is opportunity level, where it's hey, here's the situation here. It also applies at the rep level as well. I actually did a masterclass recently on data-driven sales coaching that kind of revolves around this. I think we'll grab the hyperlink, and we'll drop it into the chat here. But yeah, capturing the data and then making it available, and then making it such that it's but not just available, but also woven into the operating rhythm, right? Oh, it's available over there behind a tab in a bookmark, right? I think that those are things that one has to be mindful of. The other thing too is that I think, and you kind of touched on this. I like to think about sales operations as kind of the product manager of the sales organization. And so what you're doing is you're the author of this sales motion. You're the co-author, right? In partnership with sales leadership and what have you. But you have to think about the products that you're delivering and their usability and how they're going to be adoptable versus not adoptable. And of course, we have to think about this as relates to everybody's favorite thing, validation rules or what have you, but it's even beyond that, right? And so I think one of the challenges that we've observed as we think about is helping managers, SDR managers, AE managers, et cetera, use data to improve rep performance at the rep level, right? Not necessarily at the deal level. And so a big shift that we're seeing in the market is folks going from, oh, hey, sales operations is here. They're the dashboard jockeys, et cetera. We're kind of the information hoarders, et cetera, to more of a devolution and delegation, right? So how can I make it such that Steve has access to what he needs in a way that's usable, that brings information to him, and such that he can ask the next question in a way that's look, we're not going to make fun of Steve, but because he doesn't know how to use Looker or whatever, because who does, right? A very rarefied. And so instead of having kind of user empathy in that regard, I think is ends up being very powerful. And what I've observed, kind of the flip side of the thing that we've said about there's more and more STEM folks getting into sales. What you're also seeing is that folks who there's a very obvious recognition by sales leaders who maybe don't have that background. They're yeah, this is table stakes now.
Yes.
I gotta get it. So rather than being resistant previously, oh, screw your numbers, nerd, or whatever, kind of the scenes out of Moneyball or whatever, oh, get out of here, Jonah, right? But it's now kind of okay, cool, help me, hey, we're just here to win.
Right.
Help educate me in this regard. And that's a pretty big shift, right? And I think that's kind of showed up in the last 5 years or so, of kind of more of this appetite on managerial side for that.
Yeah. For the data-driven manager, I think that's the perfect analogy for where we're going. There, data can't tell you everything. Those
No,
analysis, that insights can't. There's absolutely still
no.
that human element to it. There's the experience, there's the knowledge, there's the insights about what to do next. But boy, it can sure help make those decisions a lot more accurate more times. If that
Yeah,
makes
like
sense.
totally. And then this is the thing that like I have to push on my reps a lot about. When you'll get managers who are like, oh well, like can this tell me exactly what the problem is with my rep, like down like, or like are the subject line wrong? And it's like, no, but like what's your job? Because like, man, the software is going to be a lot more, once it can do that, it's going to be a lot more expensive, and there's going to be like way fewer review versus, hey, can we like compress down the decision tree? Kind of like, oh man, this rep has a bookings problem. Why does he or she have a bookings problem? If then like, if like that's the prompt, oh my gosh, like that's, you're just like awash, like, oh man, versus like, hey, they have a bookings problem. It looks like it's coming from win rate because their opportunity ownership and their average selling price is fine. By the way, it looks like their win rate problem seems to be stemming from a conversion rate problem out of stage 3. And also it looks like they have like a multi-threading problem, which is kind of what you were talking about before,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Like that may not actually be the answer, but at least it's like, hey, kind of like this part of the engine sounds like it's maybe making some noises over here, like go investigate over here,
Yeah.
right? And so
Yeah.
like you being able to like narrow the potential like decision tree down can be very powerful. Because if you think about the alternatives, it's like, oh, this rep has like some like a bookings problem or whatever, or their forecast is looking light. What am I going to do? I'm going to ride along on all their calls. I'm going to go listen to all their calls. Ugh,
Which
that's
is
not as high leverage, right?
painful. Yeah. Painful and very difficult for a manager to really pull those nuggets out of it, right? I mean, who
Yeah.
really has time to go? If you're managing 10 reps, a dozen reps, you can't possibly just listen to their calls and
Oh,
and get nuggets of wisdom from it. And I like the way you described that, Pete, because it's knowing, oh, this rep has a conversion problem from stage 3. Well, let's drill down into that. Is it because we gave them customers that didn't fit our ideal customer profile? Maybe they're
might be
stalling
that.
there.
Might be
Maybe
that.
they don't know how, enough about the product to describe the value. Maybe we need a reference system for them. Maybe
Who
everybody in
knows?
Nebraska just hates our company,
But at least we're like right there, as
Yeah.
opposed to like,
Yeah.
oh man, their activity levels are fine, their new op inflow is fine. Like
Right.
we can isolate those things and like reject those as a hypothesis. And like hone in on the things that actually like really really matter. And
Yeah.
then this is the thing that we talk about as relates to and I get a lot of kind of guff from folks for like overusing sports metaphors or whatever, but it's totally it's like pinpointing where the athlete has like a hitch in their giddy up.
Yeah.
And so like, because what ends up happening is like every rep has a different problem or improvement area, right? And so like this one right here, like their win rate, even if like they're hitting quota or whatever, we can still make them better. And so like this rep right here's got a win rate problem. Okay, why is there a win rate problem? Oh, like, whereas this rep over here has like an average selling price problem. Why do they have an average selling price problem? Are they discounting too much? Like, is their average op size too low? Like literally they just have like a bunch of peewees in there. And then the one that's kind of like a more insidious kind of subcategory of this is the rep who has a low ASP that's the result of poor win rate on large ops.
Yes. Right. Right. And you
Because
can't
because
compare
obviously,
them to right. It's got to be what's the right solution for that sales rep, not let's just take a blanket approach and put everybody through pick a training program, right?
right. And I think and so this is where like data driven enablement is really gonna, I mean, I think that's probably the next thing there, is because if you think
Yes.
about like where most enablement people come from, they're teachers and and trainers and what have you. And so because we haven't had, actually I have this blog post by Nate Silver that I really like called Rich Data Poor Data. I just dropped into the chat here. And so what he talks about in there is related to like Moneyball, where you need to have good data in order for there even to be like a data-driven muscle, right?
Yes.
So we were joking about this like 20 years ago. It's like, well, of course, like sales ops are like, sales managers never needed an analytical muscle because like what would be the point? There was like
Had
no
no
data
data.
to,
Right?
yeah, exactly. Yeah. And so you see this in like athletics where baseball started out as like the earliest adopters of analytics because there's just like so much data available because like hand scoring. And then it made it to basketball. And then like, as we were talking about before, it made it to golf and so on and so forth.
Oh, it's
And
huge
so
in
then it
golf.
kind of,
Yeah.
yeah, but what ends up happening is it kind of cascades to different parts of the organization as well. So like in baseball, it started out with like, the analytics department, and then it made its way into like the dugout. And like now they're even talking about like limiting it and saying like, hey, are like, you're not going to be able to like, execute like signal shifts from the dugout or what have you. Because at this point, like you have all these coaches and managers who, maybe now they're like 45 or 50 or whatever, but like when the analytics revolution started like 15 years ago or 10 years ago, they were like, oh yeah, whatever. But now they're like fully religious about it.
Yeah.
And so I think you're going to see that happening in sales as well, where like, obviously it starts with sales ops, no problem. Ain't gotta like convince anyone there. Then it makes it to sales management. And then it eventually makes its way to enablement, where instead of doing these like blanket programs, you're like, cool. So like your training program is focused on win rate and high ASP scenarios.
Yeah. Yeah. Let me ask you this though. Do you think there's a risk of either giving bad advice that turns people off to this? Pick on the golf. If I go to a golf coach and he tells me, hey, you really need to work on your driver. And I'm like, but I only hit the driver, 10 times around. I putt 40 times around. So why don't I work on the putter?
Yeah.
No, I like the driver better. That's just, that's so anyway, either.
I think that's like the closed loop component of it, because in that data-driven coaching masterclass I was talking about, a really key thing is the observe what's going on, orient, like take a decision and make a decision and take an action. That action and like that decision and the action is a hypothesis. Right. Like you might be wrong, and like that's okay. Right.
Yeah.
But like, better than just kind of like, oh, I don't know. But then what we do is we loop back and we're like, cool, did the win rate go up?
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Did your handicap go down or whatever? Oh man, that coach was wrong.
Right.
Okay, cool. Like let's form a new hypothesis there. And I think that that's something that this is something that we find with our usually with Atrium, we're working in a given commercial transaction, we're working with management and leadership, and then also sales operations. So it's very much like a two-legged sale. And so like the most enlightened sales operations folks are focusing on like getting themselves out of the business of like basic analytics, which is like, that's low leverage, like being a dashboard jockey is like, is a waste of my time, versus what we're describing right now. Like, hey, we can devolve this to the managers, right? Like the basic stuff, like activity stuff, or like, basic analysis or whatever. And like, maybe we can automate some of that. But the things that we're going to spend our time on is kind of stuff like you were talking about the Nebraska rep. Like, hey, we've narrowed it down to here. All right, now what?
Yeah.
Right. And so now there's more time that's available for this. And I was talking to the sales leader, the sales operations leader at a very large Boston sales organization. And I was like, it was a discovery conversation. And I was like, how do you guys facilitate the interpretation of data for your, because it was actually very impressive. They'd moved off of Salesforce onto another CRM that it has like less robust reporting and analytics solutions. And so like they had this massive Looker implementation, and they have a 60-person team of analysts.
Wow.
Of like, I know, right? Wow. Like, 26-year-old, former, like Boston Consulting Group or like Bain or whatever, like finance grads or have you, like, God bless, it's fantastic. And it was funny because I was like asking this provocative question. I was like, oh, okay, cool. Well, like, how do you like, do those folks like end up spending their time actually do the interpretations? Like, no, they have to deal with like, lead routing squabbles and things like that. I was like, okay, interesting. Man, that's like $10 million a year of salary expense. And he kind of like looked up to the right and was like, yeah, I guess you're right. Versus like, hey, could we maybe get away with like, 10 of those folks, right? Or alternatively, those folks are spending their time, way more in the weeds on like crazier things like, hey man, like what actually is our superior lead source?
Well, or can we
Right.
at least make sure that those folks are adding value to that revenue engine, revenue factory that you talked about, right, earlier? And that takes a little bit of business acumen. It's, we talked about becoming a researcher. In our view, to be an analyst or a researcher, you have to have that practitioner experience, right? You have to have been a sales ops leader or a sales leader or a marketing leader in order to kind of do what we do. And I think that same thing is true for people who are trying to help sellers. You
gotta have, I mean, it's like user empathy, right?
Yeah.
And I think that's where you end up with like really interesting kind of like 5-tool player sales operations folks.
Yeah.
And actually the inverse too. So like a sale, like Don is a great example of this from Lean Data, right? Like he was a seller. Like I always joke about myself. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm a very mediocre salesperson, but like good enough to get the job done, to have like enough user empathy to like then like orchestrate their experience, or like analyze what's going on, or like iterate sales motions or whatever. I think the inverse is true too, is that like a sales operations leader or sales operations practitioner who then goes into management, right, or like and then carries a bag, kind of goes the other direction. And like that's a very like it's kind of unicorny right now, but I think that's like a very potent combination. And you kind of see that, like actually another Power Hour guest, a gentleman named Will Foley, he leads revenue operations at a company called Brazen. He's absolutely fantastic. They're a longtime Atrium customer, and so I think like he's leading the sales organization right now, because I think their sales leader is on like maternity leave or something like that. And but you see this more and more, like sales operations people who start running sales organizations, and it can be a very powerful thing.
It can be, and vice versa, right? I mean, I think it's critically important for the sales operations leader to have that connection to sellers and sales, and to want them to be successful, right?
Yeah.
I think you got to come into that job asking yourself, how can I help you, salesperson, be more successful? You're not going to always be able to do it. There's certain administrative things that you just can't remove, but I think if you approach it from that perspective, with that empathy in mind, understanding the challenges they face on a day-to-day basis, understanding the pressure that a seller is on, arguably the most measured or function in the entire organization. You can really make a difference in the organization. And I think that's what's so exciting about this evolution of sales operations that we've been talking about. You have this chance now to make a difference in the organization, and you have data and analysis that guides your efforts. And that's a huge change from where we were 20 years ago.
Yeah. And I think again, not to be like so sports metaphor here, but like it's one thing to like assess performance, which can kind of feel like, oh, I'm attacked. It's another thing, like you think about Tom Brady comes off to the sideline, and like what does he immediately do? He sits down next to, we're not Bill Belichick anymore, I forget who the Tampa coach is. Like they immediately sit down and they got printouts, and like there's something going on like the iPad or whatever, and like what's happening right there is there's coaching that's happening. You're like, okay, this is what went down, this is how we're going to improve here. And it's not about like neener, you were bad and like look out, we might put you on a PIP or whatever. Versus actually our head of marketing has this really great phrase. It's like, we need to get out of the PIP business, right? The performance improvement plan. Like it's almost like a vestige of a time when we didn't have enough data, where like it had to get bad enough that when we put someone on a performance improvement plan, versus like a continuous improvement plan. Even like the word plan is like, ugh, right? Just like a continuous improvement process, right? Where like it's just woven into your operating rhythm, where just like, coming off the sideline, here's the coaching that happens. All right, get back in there. Right. And like making space in the operating rhythm in order for that to happen. I think that we're going to see a lot more of that in the coming 10 years.
Yes.
And so what will happen is rather than like reps kind of feeling like, right, or managers, and managers the same way too, like they feel kind of like, oh man, like I don't want to be the heavy, etc. And it's more like, no, like Tom Brady and Bill Belichick, right? Like sitting side by side, like, we're just here to win. We're going to make you more successful. We're going to use the data, like the technology and data that we can in order to make that happen.
Yeah, that's a great example. And I know we all overuse the sports analogies, but the way you coach a Tom Brady is going to be different than the way you coach someone who's just come out of college and it's their first year in the NFL, right? And so back to this idea of data-driven sales enablement that's really tailored to the role you're asking that individual to do, the skills they bring to that role, and the knowledge that you give them to be successful in that role is very different from, we're going to put everybody through a sales negotiation class. I don't care if you're a strategic account manager or you're a BDR. We're going to check the box and get those butts in the seat. Yeah. So it's an exciting time for sales ops, sales enablement, and sales in general.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, and we'll have to wrap up on this. But like one of the places that's like most resistant to data-driven sales management is those enterprise, like sellers.
Yeah.
Which is like, and you have all these like weird vestiges like, oh yeah, you can't measure that. It's like, what are you talking about? Of course you can, right? Sure. Historically, because they've been in the field, they've been resistant. Like the data's been hard to accrete. We did about 150 customer interviews when we first started Atrium. It was like back in 2016. And there was this head of sales operations who's like, oh yeah, like the way that we used to measure our field reps was by expense reports, because it was the only data that we could get. And there was like a robust correlation between the level of like expense reports, like not like total money spent, but on a meeting by meeting basis, or like number. Essentially, it was just essentially like it was an activity that had been logged in order for them to get that $50 back or that $100 back or what have you. And so the funny thing is that like but of course the application of data to that enterprise rep or that strategic rep has to be in a way that like aligns with how they're going to be able to consume it and be able to change their behavior. Yeah. Wonderful. Well, you know what, Steve, we're all out of time. Unfortunately, this is super fantastic. I hope you had a really good time. As I noted earlier, it's just like a rollicking good time of like sales nerdery. Thank you very much for taking the time. Next week, I'm super pumped. We've got Bill Binch coming to join us. He's currently an operating partner at Battery Ventures. He's former CRO at Pendo. Before that, he was a sales leader at like Marketo. He's been around the block, just a couple times. He's going to be with us next Friday. Steve, thank you very much for taking the time. Really appreciate it, and have a great weekend. Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. See ya.